The dust hung heavy in the late afternoon sun as the townsfolk gathered in the square, their voices rising in judgment and whispers like a storm brewing over the horizon. She stood at the center, her pale dress catching the light but her eyes cast low, shoulders trembling with the weight of their disdain. They had branded her with shame, not with fire but with words sharper than knives, determined to drive her out as if her presence alone poisoned the soil they walked on. Men muttered about morality. Women crossed their arms with hardened faces, and even the children watched with a cruel curiosity, learning the language of scorn far too young. She had no kin to defend her, no voice strong enough to rise above the tide of accusation, only the ache of betrayal and the hollow ache in her chest that once carried hope. Just as the sheriff's boots scraped against the wood of the platform to announce her exile, a figure stepped forward from the line of onlookers, dust clinging to his coat and the brim of his hat casting his eyes into shadow. The cowboy had been silent until now, a man who rarely spoke unless his words carried purpose, and when he walked toward her, the crowd parted not from respect but from uncertainty, as if the earth itself shifted to make way for his stride. He reached her side, his presence steady as stone, and without hesitation he took her trembling hand into his own, his grip firm, grounding, a declaration that carried more weight than any speech. "She stays with me," he said, his voice cutting through the murmur like thunder cracking across the plains, leaving no room for doubt, no space for defiance. Gasps rose from the crowd, some with outrage, others with shock. But he did not release her hand, and she, wide-eyed and trembling, felt strength pour into her veins where moments before there had only been fear. The townsfolk shifted uneasily, muttering protests, some even shouting that she didn't belong. But the cowboy's gaze swept over them with fire and conviction, daring anyone to step forward. "You want to drive her out?" he challenged, his tone ironclad. "Then you'll have to drive me out too. And you know damn well I don't run." The air grew still as if the wind itself paused to listen. And suddenly the weight of the crowd's cruelty seemed smaller compared to the unshakable shield of one man's loyalty. For years they had whispered about him, the wanderer, the drifter with a past no one dared to pry into, the man who stood taller than the injustices of law or gossip. Now, with her hand in his, the townsfolk saw not a woman broken by shame, but a woman claimed by courage, lifted by love not yet spoken but already proved. Slowly the voices died down, some averting their eyes in guilt, others stewing in bitterness, but none daring to defy him further. He guided her down from the platform, each step heavy with defiance and dignity, her chin rising higher with every pace as the strength of his promise settled in her soul. Though fear still lingered in her heart, she knew she would not face it alone, not anymore. He didn't let go, even when they reached the edge of the square, where the dust road stretched out to the horizon and freedom whispered in the wind. She looked up at him, tears trembling in her eyes, her lips parting to speak the gratitude she couldn't put into words, but he only squeezed her hand tighter, his expression saying everything. "You are not alone. You will never be alone again." And for the first time in days, she breathed without the weight of shame crushing her chest. The town had tried to break her spirit, but instead they had revealed the truest kind of strength, the kind that comes when someone stands beside you when no one else will. It was not just defiance, it was devotion, and it was only the beginning of their story. Dear friends, if this tale of courage, loyalty, and love moved you, remember, our stories only live on when we share them. So if you believe in standing tall against injustice and finding hope even in the harshest deserts, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more powerful cowboy tales that stir the heart and keep the spirit of the Wild West alive. The days that followed were uneasy ones, for though the cowboy's bold declarations silenced the crowd that afternoon, whispers carried like wildfire across the town. Some folks avoided her entirely, turning their faces as she passed, while others muttered under their breath, their venom now masked behind doors and fences. Yet, despite the lingering hostility, she found her steps steadier, for the cowboy never left her side. He walked with her through the market, his presence alone enough to keep cruel tongues from lashing too loud, and at night when doubt crept into her thoughts, he spoke softly by the fire, reminding her that worth was not measured by gossip, but by the truth of who she was. For the first time, she felt seen not as a burden, but as someone worth standing for. Still, tension brewed like storm clouds on the horizon. The men who had pushed hardest for her exile gathered in secret, anger gnawing at their pride, unable to accept the cowboy's defiance. They muttered about order, about protecting the town's name, but beneath their words was nothing more than envy of a man who had the courage they lacked. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in fire and gold, they stepped into the road where she and the cowboy walked, their faces hard, their intentions clear. The leader spat on the ground and sneered. "We told you she don't belong." The air grew tight, the silence heavy, and though fear pricked at her skin, the cowboy's hand tightened around hers. He stepped forward, his stance unshaken, his voice calm but edged with steel. "She belongs with me," he said again, not shouting this time, but speaking with such conviction it seemed the earth itself would not dare deny him.